This is one that is used extensively. This is the Japanese red pine. It's very similar to the Scotch pine, which is what you will see used here in Nikka Yuko. Red pine will grow anywhere from 60 to 80 feet tall and often has this flat-topped shape. This is actually in Stanley Park in Vancouver. This is very valued in Japanese culture, and Japanese red pine doesn't always do this, but it frequently does, and it also has beautiful red bark, which is why it is called the red pine. It is very common not only in Japan, but also China, Korea, Siberia. It has been harvested for timber for centuries. It has long needles. It makes a really, really excellent subject for bonsai. And so the whole point of bonsai, which by the way, bonsai is actually a Chinese art that the Japanese perfected. So it is, the goal of bonsai is to make a tree in miniature look as rugged and windswept and old as a tree on a mountainside does. So this is a red pine growing in the wild in the mountains of Japan, and it's rooted itself right into this crack in the rock. So the goal of bonsai as an art is to recreate this in miniature. So when you see bonsai, they often look very much like this, and the whole goal of this is to make a tree in very small look as it does largely in the mountains. So here's Japanese red pine used as a bonsai, and they can live for centuries, and they are absolutely gorgeous. The Japanese term for this tree is akamatsu. Officially it is hardy to about zone 4. I suspect it's probably hardier, but that is merely a suspicion. This is the Japanese black pine, which looks very much like the jack pine that grows in northern Canada, except that the needles are softer. It can also be found in Korea, and it's less hardy than the jack pine. It's prized for bonsai as well. The color of the needles matters. This is Japanese white pine, which can grow 80 feet, but the needles are this wonderful blue-green. And the shape of it is much denser than a lot of other pines. It grows quite slowly. Many pines that are native to Japan are now prized in gardens around the world. This might be one of the most unusual trees that is native to Japan and actually in the world. This is commonly called Japanese umbrella pine. The Japanese call it koyamaki. It is completely unique in the world of conifers, and it does have a very pine-like appearance, but it is not in fact a pine. The Japanese umbrella pine predates dinosaurs by many millions of years. It is the only species in its genus. It has no close relatives. If you have ever purchased amber jewelry, it is believed that amber, which, by the way, amber is often regarded as being fossilized tree sap. That is not true. What it actually is fossilized resin. And resin and sap are different. Resin is a defensive fluid, whereas sap is actually the lifeblood of the tree. So if you cut a conifer, it will bleed resin, which is a deterrent to insects and diseases. So the Japanese umbrella pine goes back in the fossil record 230 million years. It is old, and it grows fast when it is young, but it grows much more slowly with age. It will eventually reach about 80 feet, and it's very common in gardens in mild climates. But you can see why it's called the umbrella pine, because up close, it looks like these are like the foliage is held in little umbrellas. Now, what is interesting, we think of conifers as producing needles. The Japanese umbrella pine does not produce needles. What you are looking at here are botanical structures that are called cladodes. And cladodes are actually much closer to stem than leaf in terms of tissue. What you are basically looking at are photosynthetic stems rather than leaves, which makes it completely unique in the conifer kingdom. You'll see this very often in Victoria and Vancouver. It's not hardy enough to grow here, but it is highly prized in Japan. The needles are, of course, if you call them needles, they are very soft. The whole tree is very huggable, and because it is so highly regarded by the Japanese, this is actually, it was chosen as the imperial crest for Prince Hisahito of the Japanese royal family. It was brought to Europe for the first time in 1860 and has been prized in gardens ever since. Japan is the only country in the world where this tree occurs naturally. Some of you are probably familiar with yew, Y-E-W. This is the plum yew. And plum yew, there are a few species, all of them are Asian. This is the Japanese plum yew. And they do something that is very, very odd for a conifer. Very few conifers do this. They produce cones, which is what all coniferous trees do, but their cones are wrapped in flesh. So basically it is a cone inside of a berry, is essentially what it is. And the plum yew produces these beautiful small flesh-covered cones that look very much like a small plum. So it is as valued in Japan for the beauty of the fruit as it is for the needles. It has beautiful flaky reddish bark. Often multi-stemmed, they are suckering trees that form thickets. You can grow them from seed. In fact, I was at Vale's greenhouse in Black Diamond this week, and they actually have plum yews, which they sell as container plants. They like moisture, they can handle being trimmed. It's a really interesting, really beautiful conifer that Japan has given the world. And this is, of course, the true yew. There are English yews, there are American yews, and there are Japanese yews. And the Japanese yews also produce a cone inside a fleshy berry. The true species of yew are also exceedingly poisonous. This was actually in Celtic lore, yew is the symbol of immortality because it was the fastest way to get from this world to the next, because yew can kill you very easily. And the Japanese yew, which is gorgeous, has been used in a lot of breeding programs to produce yews that are hardy in our climate. This is another interesting conifer from Japan. This is the Japanese cedar. And Japanese cedar, the Latin name is Cryptomeria japonica. There is only one species in the genus. It is not a true cedar. It is now found in the wild in China as well, but it was actually introduced there about 1,000 years ago. It produces very straight trunks, absolutely gorgeous reddish-brown brown wood. The wood is very resistant to rot. It has been used for building temples and pagodas in Japan for literally thousands of years. It's also believed that Japan as a nation, which is, you know, a series of islands, some very, very large, that all of the islands of Japan were once heavily forested. They are not heavily forested today. Japan is one of the most populated nations in the world, and it's estimated that only 1 to 2% of Japan's original native forests are still standing, which is very tragic and sad. But Japanese cedar was the tree that once covered most of Japan, and it's very easy to grow. It reaches on average about 90 feet tall. It can grow as tall as 200 feet, and it can live for centuries and centuries. And in fact, there are some still alive that are several thousand years old. So we don't really know how long Japanese cedar lives. It appears to live almost indefinitely. The wood is not only beautiful, it's also fragrant. And not only is it resistant to rot, it's also very resistant to insects. The Japanese prize the wood for its beauty, for its scent, and also the fact that Japanese cedar wood is very lightweight, but it is also very, very strong. So there is a reason that it was used as much as it was. So this is probably the oldest tree in Japan. It's certainly the largest tree in Japan. This is Yomonsuji. Yomonsuji is the largest known specimen of Japanese cedar in the world, and he lives on Yakushima Island. Yakushima Island is about 1,100 kilometers southwest of Tokyo. It's very rugged and remote and windswept and rainy. It was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I can't remember when, but it had to do a lot with the discovery of this tree. And so the most conservative estimates place Yomonsuji at 2,200 years old. There are a number of botanists who have argued credibly that he could be as old as 5 or 6 or even 7,000 years old. He is 83 feet tall with a girth of 54 feet. So we don't actually know how old he is. If he was 7,000 years old, which is possible, it would make Yomonsuji the oldest living tree on the planet. We don't really have a way of proving that. It grows on the highest peak on Yakushima Island, and actually you can visit Yomonsuji, but it still involves a very rugged and difficult hike that takes about 5 hours to reach this tree, and you're not allowed to touch him because they are afraid of people bringing diseases, or people want to snap off bark or take cuttings, so you have to view him from a special viewing platform. He was only discovered in 1968. He grows at an elevation of 4,300 feet, and it is his inaccessibility that saved him. The loggers simply could not get up there. So when he was discovered in the 1960s, nobody actually had any idea that trees of this age and girth still existed in Japan. So there is now a flourishing tourist economy on Yakushima Island, and it is in part because of Yomonsuji. You know if a tree has been officially named that it is a tourist attraction. So you will also see Japanese cedar planted quite often in Vancouver, and because it is quite easy from seed, when I was lecturing at the University of British Columbia in November, I actually gathered some of the very interesting and tiny little cones from the Japanese cedars that grow in the Botanic Garden, and I was able to germinate a number of the seedlings. So do I think that Lethbridge is an ideal climate for Japanese cedar? Probably not. And by probably not, I'm inclined to say actually probably no. However, if you had a very sheltered spot where it was moist and protected from the wind, why not try one? Or if you wanted to use it as a subject for bonsai, or if you wanted to, grow it in a container and bring it indoors for the winter if you had a cool spot, a cool window, I have brought along a couple of seedlings for Japanese cedar. I think I have 4 or 5 of them here. So if you would like one, come and talk to me after the presentation, and I will gladly send you home with one. You just have to, there's one condition, and that is that you have to report back to me and let me know how it does for you. Most of us are familiar with larch. A lot of us actually probably travel to the mountains here in southern Alberta to see the changing color of the larch in the fall. Larch are very unusual amongst conifers in that they are deciduous. So they do produce needles and cones, as all coniferous trees do. But they actually will change color and drop their needles in the fall and re-leaf in the spring. And the needles are gloriously, gloriously soft. There are 11 species of larch in the world. The Japanese larch is actually quite common in the western half of Japan. It can grow about 100 feet tall, so it's not cultivated very often because it is very big. It takes up a lot of room. There are quite a number of cultivars of it available, including the weeping larch. So if you buy a weeping larch at a garden center, which you can certainly do, it's almost invariably the Japanese larch, which also grows quite slowly. I took this photo this week in the London Road area of Lethbridge here. Weeping larch is available, but they're hard to propagate, so they are expensive. If you buy one, average price for a Japanese weeping larch is about $100. So, but it will outlive you, so that's fine. I think that's totally a good investment. So, this is Podocarpus, which is another ancient conifer. There are about 100 species of Podocarpus. Most of them are from the southern hemisphere. This is an exception. This is commonly known as lowhem pine. The Japanese call it kusamaki. It comes from both China and Japan, and it can grow about 60 feet. It's often pruned as a hedge. It's often planted around temples and shrines. It's a beautiful, interesting, peculiar evergreen. I put a couple of broadleaf evergreens into this presentation. This is Pittosporum. This is commonly called Tobira. Most species of Pittosporum are from New Zealand. There are about 200 species. This is one of the unusual Japanese species, and some of you might recognize that foliage because it is often used by florists as cut flower material. The flowers are not particularly showy, but very, very fragrant, so it has been prized in Japan for centuries, not only for the simplicity and the elegance of the flower, but also for the fact that it is evergreen, and the leaves are held at these unusual up-facing angles, which the Japanese absolutely love. It is slow growing and it cannot handle a frost, so you're not going to grow it in Lethbridge, but that is all right. This is one you may have seen for sale at Christmas time. This is Skimmia. Skimmia is related to rue, which also is the same family that includes citrus trees, and has beautiful evergreen foliage. It can handle intense pollution. It has little clusters of pink or white flowers in the spring, or in the early spring or late winter, and it is very much able to handle either sun or shade. So this is often planted in cities like Seattle, Beijing, Tokyo, because it can handle dark shade corners with cigarette butts and smog, and it will still actually survive and be beautiful. It's easy to propagate, it's inexpensive. I bought one last year at Safeway at Christmas time in a 4-inch pot, and it was beautiful on my table until March. Boxwoods are common broadleaf evergreens. They are used around the world and have been for centuries for hedges, as foundation shrubs. They produce very tiny little yellow flowers that you probably wouldn't notice, except for the fact that bees love them. There are about 70 species of boxwood. The Japanese boxwood is also found in Taiwan, and it is slow growing. It can reach about 6 feet, but as you can see, they very much can handle being shaped and sheared. Japanese boxwood is also used for bonsai. You will see some boxwood in Nikka Yuko, but they are the Korean species, which is much hardier. If you were at the Rita Rock Garden in downtown Calgary, you will also see Korean boxwood. So we have used the Korean boxwood at Nikka Yuko because the Japanese boxwood will not survive in our climate, which does not stop Costco from selling them. I've seen Japanese boxwood for sale just this week, actually. So when we think about holly, most of us are thinking about Christmas time and big prickly evergreen leaves. The Japanese holly is not like that at all. It's often mistaken for a boxwood. Hollies are so diverse. There are about 700 species of holly in the world, and they are so unlike anything else that holly actually comprises its own family. So the Japanese holly is also native to Korea and China and Taiwan, and it's also sometimes called box holly. It does not look anything like the holly that we see at Christmas time. First of all, it has teeny, teeny, tiny little leaves, and it does produce berries on female plants, but the berries are very small and they are black. We normally think of holly fruit as being red, but it is often planted in mild climates for hedges, for foundation shrubs. There's many forms of it. Some of them have won quite a number of awards from the Royal Horticultural Society. But the Japanese prize holly for their gardens because it is evergreen, it is fine textured, it is slow growing, and it can be shaped or sheared. It also has 0 pest or disease problems. This has to be one of the most beautiful broadleaf evergreens native to Japan. This is Ardisia. Ardisias are sometimes called coral berries. They are grown for the fact that the foliage is evergreen and quite simple, which the Japanese love. Simplicity is a big thing in Japanese culture. So they don't need flash and dazzle. Very often it is for the shape of the leaf that they are grown. Likes mild winters and humidity. It does not like wind. So you will not generally find this in gardens in Alberta because they would fry like bacon. But there are several species from Japan, and they are very showy and also found in China. They are also grown for the fact that they will colonize and that the berries last for a long time. You can't talk about Japanese evergreens and not talk about rhododendrons. And rhododendrons are, it is possible to grow rhododendrons in Alberta. We actually have 2 native species, but they are difficult to grow. And they have to have very specific conditions. This is one of the most prized rhododendrons in Japan. This is rhododendron yakushimanum, which, like Yomonsuji, comes from Yakushima Island. And it is prized not only for the fact that it is small, but for the fact that it flowers for weeks and weeks, and you get beautiful pink buds that open to white flowers. So you get this absolutely gorgeous